I would bet anything that you are your own worst critic. No matter how much you achieve, whatever it is you accomplish, there's always more you could have done. It's never quite good enough. And this is such a painful habit to get stuck with because it can just erode your confidence and your trust in yourself across time. So in this video, I want to talk through what exactly is going on in self-criticism and what you can do to begin to move past this so that you can actually enjoy the success that you've achieved and actually go out and accomplish more without being stuck in this kind of internal conflict. So let's take it as a given that this self-criticism is something you've learned over the years. None of us come out of the womb with an inner critic. This is a habit of thought. This is a way of relating to ourselves that we develop over the course of our lives. And frankly, it's quite bizarre when we consider it that nothing else in the living world has this kind of relationship with itself. We'd be hard pressed to find an example in the rest of the whole biological sphere, anything that is so at odds with itself as is the human animal. Now, we might consider what makes the human animal unique in the animal kingdom. There are many things, quite frankly, but one of the most important is the incredible degree to which we are dependent on our caregivers early in life. We, compared with just about every other animal, are effectively born premature. We are helpless on our own for the most part. And we have this long period of dependency up until the age of what, 33? When many of us are dependent on our parents, right? I kid, of course, but well, maybe it's not so much of a joke for some. So anyway, we have this prolonged period of dependency on our caregivers. And what that means is that our survival depends less on avoiding predators and more on maintaining relationships. Now, if our survival depends upon this, then if something threatens our relationship with our caregivers, we will do our best to negate that thing. So I have all of this as a contextual background for self-criticism because your experiences of self-criticism, they also arise in a very specific context, which is to say you are likely not engaged in self-criticism every waking moment of every day. I'm willing to bet that if you consider a recent experience of self-criticism, oh my, vroom vroom, I don't know if you can hear crazy engine in the background. I'm willing to bet if you can consider a recent experience of self-criticism, this is likely triggered by something. I would, if I were a betting man, I would bet that this arises in the aftermath of a conflict you've had with somebody. This could be with a client who sent you a nasty email and maybe leads you to question the worth of your offer, the quality of your work. Maybe a pitch you had didn't go so well, and you find that you're just constantly tearing yourself down, wondering all the ways this could have gone better. Maybe you record a bit of content and you think, oh God, I fumbled over my words. I'm such an idiot at this and that and the other. Maybe it's not that bad, or maybe it's in a totally different circumstance. But whatever the case is, if we take an inquisitive look at this, again, I'd be willing to bet that this self-critical tendency really ramps up in the aftermath of some bit of friction you encounter in an interpersonal relationship. Now, why does this matter? Well, like I suggested before, our survival depends on the preservation of relationships, more so than it does on the avoidance of predators. So if, again, there is something that we intuit, something that we suspect might compromise the relationships on which our survival seems to depend, we will negate that thing. So if we encounter friction in a relationship, if there's some conflict, let's say, somebody sent you an email that led you to doubt yourself, or you get in an argument with your spouse, or whatever the case is. The question is, what do you feel toward that person for doing whatever thing they did? Now, in this case, as I mentioned in a previous video, it is quite likely something akin to anger. We feel anger toward those who threaten something that we value. And maybe in the case of this conflict, what you value that was threatened is your sense of dignity and respect. Maybe it's the relationship itself that you value. Maybe it's fair treatment, whatever the case is. This other person, through their actions, they've compromised something you value in all likelihood. And the logical thing that we feel in those cases is anger toward the other person. Now, I get it. Anger is edgy. It is conflicted. We feel like we shouldn't feel angry. Good people don't feel angry. It's irrational to feel angry. Whatever the case is, we engage in all sorts of mental acrobatics to distance ourselves from anger, not the least of which is using all kinds of cover words. I'm upset. I'm frustrated. Whatever. I'm disappointed. These are all things that the person did. They upset you. They disappoint you. They frustrated you. What do you feel toward them for that? Betrayed, hurt. No. These are what they did. They betrayed you. They hurt you. They disappointed you. They frustrated you. They upset you. So what is the feeling toward that person for having done that? Now, inevitably, it's going to be something like anger. But here's the thing. You likely have learned to turn anger away from others in the external world and back toward yourself. Rather than risk these relationships out here by criticizing the other person and their actions, you have no doubt learned to turn that criticism back toward yourself. Now, this is well-intentioned, right? It has the function of protecting this other person or these others out here from a kind of criticism which could threaten the relationship even more. So if you feel this anger toward the other person and you worry that expressing this anger would cost you the relationship, then you'll no doubt experience a great deal of anxiety. You will worry about the loss of this relationship. And in order to distance yourself from that threatening, supposedly threatening experience of anger, you will turn the anger back toward yourself in the form of self-criticism. It's a fairly predictable, logical sequence of events that I see time and time again with clients. It's something that comes up quite often, especially for those of us who we care a lot about other people. We want to do right by other people. We don't want to rock the boat too much. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We will quite often turn that anger back toward us as a way to preserve the relationship, even at our own expense. Now, if this is the case for you, it's worth checking in with. What happens when you turn that anger, when you turn that criticism back toward yourself? Just consider, face value. Is this good for you, or is this not so good for you? Are you made stronger by this self-criticism, or are you made weaker? Is this in alignment with your intention, or is this counter to your intention? We want to be honest with the answers, because maybe it actually is your intention to erode and diminish your sense of self. Maybe it is your intention to cut yourself down to size. Maybe it's your intention to make yourself weak or to end up miserable. I don't know. People have all sorts of intentions. But if that is actually counter to your intention, it's very important to consider that you have at some point gone down a fork in the road that leads you to the land of self-criticism, which inevitably weakens you and erodes your sense of self and makes you miserable, is probably counter to what you would like for yourself. So what do? Well, we can walk ourselves back to the moment just before you took that fork in the road, leading you to criticize yourself. And we can wonder, if you didn't turn that anger back toward yourself in the form of self-criticism, where else might it go? Inevitably, this is going to be a bit of an anxiety-provoking question, which is why in the thumbnail we've got this question: is self-criticism a coward? In a way, when we are fearful of losing the relationship, when we let our actions be governed by fear rather than by our intention, we will take this, this coward's path of self-criticism. We will avoid conflict in the relationship, taking a kind of passive approach, even at our own expense, rather than muster up the courage to engage in that confrontation. Now, I am not suggesting that if you feel anger toward this other person, that you fly off the handle, you lose your cool, you punch a hole in the wall, you do any of these things. Anger does not need to be just naively discharged in these acting out kinds of ways. But in a state of fear, in a state of anxiety, that's what many people worry will happen if they connect with their anger. Again, they are afraid that they will become some monster if they experience and express their anger. But that is almost never the case. What they confuse are certain expressions of anger with the experience of anger. And they lack a kind of nuanced understanding of what can be done with anger. So rather than squash your anger or turn it back toward yourself in the form of self-criticism, or explode it out in the world in some fit of rage, what if you could harness that anger through the skill of emotional mastery? What if you could channel that anger constructively toward the fulfillment of what you value? Again, anger, it mobilizes us for a fight. And we can either fight against that which is compromising the thing that we value, or we can fight for what we value. However, we are impotent to fight for what we value if we're too busy turning that engine of anger back toward us, cutting ourselves down, eroding our sense of self. We're helpless then to actually assert ourselves for what we value. Now, I will say, it takes courage to connect with your experience of anger, to face this thing that you have likely repressed for so long, and to assert yourself in a conflicted relationship on behalf of what you value. That takes tremendous courage, and I do not want to make this sound like some easy thing. It's not easy. However, we have this fork in the road, and you know where this path of self-criticism leads. This leads to you feeling terrible. Yeah. It leads to ongoing resentment and frustration and this kind of feeling in this relationship. What if, rather than turning the anger back toward yourself in the form of self-criticism, what if you could harness that energy that anger affords you? What if you could learn from the information that anger provides you and bring that energy and bring that information to bear in the conflict that has arisen in this relationship? What if you could assert yourself with confidence and say to a client, for example, who sends a nasty email, I actually don't appreciate the tone of this email, and I think these criticisms are invalid, and there's this and this and this that I believe instead. What do you make of that? Or what if in a conflict with your partner, rather than you spiraling off into this rumination and wondering what a piece of shit you are, and oh, you're a terrible partner, and oh, you could do better, and oh, all of this, what if you could say, hey, the way that things are going right now doesn't work for me. And actually, I don't think that it works for us. And I want us to have a healthier relationship. You could say something like this if you can find a base of support underneath of you, I often guide clients to connect with their sit bones, noticing where they feel a sense of support beneath them. If you can find a base of support and harness the energy and the information provided by that anger, rather than directing it toward yourself in this self-destructive way, you could bring that to the relationship as a whole, as a resource. You could actually bring that energy and bring that information to the relationship, and you could use it as a resource to develop the relationship even further. Quite often we shy away from conflicts out of a fearfulness that conflict will ruin the relationship. But what emotionally mature individuals know is that a good relationship is made stronger by conflict. If we can go through this process of rupture and repair, the relationship becomes more potent across time. And you rob the relationship of its capacity for growth if you are unwilling to bring the energy and the information of your anger to the relationship. If you turn that back toward you in the form of self-criticism, the relationship cannot develop because one of the key elements of the relationship is being destroyed by itself. You are not effective in your relationships if you engage in self-criticism. And I know that it is not easy. It takes courage, but it is necessary for the development of our relationships that we bring our anger to them through the channeling of that anger towards something like healthy assertion. So in other videos, I've talked about the process whereby we can channel this anger more effectively. What I want to suggest for the time being is that the first step is labeling that we are in fact angry, rather than pretending that we're something that we aren't, or pretending that we aren't something that we are. So being able to label that we do in fact feel anger. A second key step is connecting with the embodied experience of that anger. Noticing the kind of charge, the way that we're revved up, the way that we're mobilized and energized when we feel this anger. And then, and this is edgy for a lot of people, being able to imagine in fantasy what that anger wants. We know what you want in this case. That's to avoid conflict. We know that you maybe want to preserve the relationship. It's worth being able to imagine what the anger itself wants. And that is really difficult for people to get a sense of. Many people will shy away from this violent imagery, again, in a state of anxiety. And what they'll do is they will turn the anger back toward themselves rather than risk the thought crime of imagining violence towards some other. And I want to differentiate. Imagining violence towards some other is very different than enacting violence towards some other. I am not suggesting that you partake in violence towards some other person. What I am suggesting is that if you can imagine this anger and what it wants, what it would take to satisfy the anger, if you can imagine that, you can metabolize that anger, and you will inevitably find that it actually brings you into a more fulfilling, loving relationship with that other person. So I'm going to pause there for the time being, in part because I see my computer is actually about to die. So if you have questions about this process, I would love for you to drop them in the comments down below. In the description beneath this video, you'll also see a link to sign up for email notifications where I talk further in depth about these ideas. And you can learn a bit more about what it looks like to work together as well. But for the time being, thank you. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to next time.